welcome to another Scots Way podcast. And tonight I am joined by writer Charles E McGarry. Hello, Charlie.
Hi, Ali. Good to see you.
And you. And we're going to talk mainly about the mystery of the Strange Piper, the third of the Leo Moran Mysteries, but I'm sure we'll touch on so much more. I thought before we got into the book in specifics, let's talk about Leo Moran as a character, because he's a character that I absolutely love, and I'm really interested in how he came about.
Yes, well, first of all, it's great to be on the show because you've been a real champion of Leo Moran since the beginning. This is the third book that's come out just on Friday there, and you've extolled his virtues to the extent that one of your review quotes, as you know, adorns the rear jacket of the new book. So,
well, here is the book, and it is indeed. And I was chuffed a bit, I have to say, that was the case.
I mean, it's one of these, that quote's one of these ones that really I should be giving you a brown envelope in the post with some used banknotes in it. But so, yeah, Leo was conceived, I reckon, about late 2010. He is a psychic detective. He's a eccentric, cultured, erudite, bon vivant. When I say he's a psychic detective, he is. He has certain visions which pertain to certain crimes. Usually, they're oblique visions. They might come in dreams. They might come in daydreams. I think I got the original idea. I remember when I was a teenager, I watched a documentary. I don't know if it was solely about this woman or whether it was about different psychics. It was about this woman who was a psychic in America, quite a celebrated one, and she predicted or foresaw the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor, which obviously caused America's involvement in World War II. And of course, she wasn't listened to. She was considered a crank. But something always fascinated me about that. And I think I had a vague idea for a psychic detective for a number of years, probably going back to the 1990s, because I used to live in London, and I remember kind of thinking about it then, but I had absolutely no meat on the bones. It was just a completely embryonic idea. And then late 2010, my cousin and her husband, they bought, or rather constructed, a house on the banks of, or near the banks of Loch Awe in Argyll. And it was a beautiful Scandinavian kind of style. Well, it was actually Scandinavian, they kind of imported the parts in. So I went up to visit for the first time, and it would have been maybe October or November. And so that was the darkening evenings, and the landscape all kind of denuded of leaves and browns and blacks and greys instead of the colours of summer. And it was just very atmospheric. And the landscape, I would say, is almost a character in the first book. It takes on that role. In the book, I fictionalised it as Loch On, which is spelled D-H-O-N-N. I used to call it Loch Don until someone, a Gaelic speaker, told me that you don't pronounce it like that. I think Chon means brown. Right. So that was just the name for it. And it's a rough version of Loch Awe. Other influences that kind of converged at that time was what I just finished. That summer I read A Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy too. I don't know if any of your listeners have read that. It's a remarkable book, very funny book, set in New Orleans. And the kind of the hero or anti-hero of that's a guy called Ignatius J. Riley, who's an extremely pompous and supercilious man. And he had a bit of an influence on Leo, but Leo's got far more redeeming qualities than Ignatius. Leo is a gentleman, and he's good-hearted, even though he can be pompous and sharp-tongued sometimes. Also, I think probably not that long before then, someone had given me the box set of the Sherlock Holmes books, and I'd read them all and loved them all. I'd always been a fan of the Basil Rathbone films and the Jeremy Brett television shows. So Sherlock Holmes was, like, as with everyone, forefront in my mind, but reading the books was a different experience altogether, and that's an influence on Leo.
Yeah.
As is the kind of Watson sidekick. Watson's kind of fulfilled by Fordyce, who he meets in the first book. I mean, another small incident that occurred then was I had a nasty bout of flu, and as everyone knows, when you have flu, you can have very peculiar and vivid dreams.
Yeah.
And that kind of just fed into this idea of visions of as I say, pertain to certain crimes. And in fact, the book actually opens with Leo waking from a vision and wondering if it was a flu dream or if it was actually something far more sinister than that. So these were things that all converged, really all at the same time, Ali. And before I knew it, I was writing this book, and I knocked a first draft out quite quickly. Because of that, I think it needed rewrites and editorial work and everything else, and changed the order of some things. But really, the book didn't change that much from the first draft. That was how it was all conceived. And
were you always aware that it was going to be more than one book, that it was going to be a series? And the reason I ask is that it seems that in each book, you give away a little bit more about Leo's background and the things that have happened to him to make him the man he is.
Well, actually, no. I think I wanted to make it a series, but it all happened so suddenly and unexpectedly that I didn't know if another idea would materialize. And another one did materialize, which is set this time in Kirkcudbrightshire, a kind of fictionalized version of a part of inland Kirkcudbrightshire that's called The Shadow of the Black Earl. So when Berlin Polygon took an interest in the ghost of Helen Addison, so I went through to meet them and sat down with a couple of people there, and I kind of expected they would say, is this a series? We want to sign up for a 3-book deal. And I was a little bit maybe anxious about that, because I thought, no, is this second book going to come to anything? Now, I had it in kind of note form, or development notes. I'd done a bit of research, but so I kind of punted it to them, and they said, okay, right, it's a 2-book deal. And then they hit me with a deadline of 12 months, and I had to write the blessed thing, and it went fine. In fact, it went too fine, because I ended up writing 150,000 words, and I'd kept a bottle of champagne for that moment, opened the champagne, shared it out, drank it, and the next morning I pinged off the email and almost instantly got a response saying, this is 50,000 words too long. So it was kind of back to the drawing board. But it wasn't as bad as it sounds, because I had a couple of kind of sub-narratives in it. One was telling Leo's backstory about when he was a teenager and the kind of traumas he went through, and one was telling his romantic interests backstory and the traumas she went through as a child. And I basically just took them out and then just hid everything else back. The third book, which is just out, The Mystery of the Strange Piper, it's basically set on the Isle of Bute, Ali. I've called it the Isle of Sonna, Sonna, but to all intents and purposes, it's Bute. And the first 2 books, I did make some geographical rearrangement, shall we say, but this book is more or less a replica of Bute. Now, I've got a strong connection with Bute because I spent all my childhood holidays there, as did a lot of my extended family. So it's a bit of a kind of legendary place to us. There's just so many funny and affectionate stories about the place. So people kept saying to me, when are you going to set one in Bute? I'm not 100% sure, right? But maybe somebody seeded the idea. I can't remember who it was. So if I'm not crediting someone, then it's genuine. I just can't remember it. So I started writing that. It was, in terms of research and all that, was much easier because I know the place very well, and it's just out. It's out with a new publisher called Backpage Press, and we've got the rights to the first 2 books, and we've reissued them and we've rejacketed them. So all 3 books have now got a more old-fashioned golden age style to the jackets that kind of blend in with each other.
Yeah, I was having a look at all 3, and again, for people that are watching the video, but if you don't go to the website and check Backpage Press website, they're really lovely covers. The design on them is fantastic.
Thanks. I was quite lucky to get them, Ali, because I was kind of running out of ideas. I knew I wanted something more golden age and more just evocative of the interwar period of crime writing, but I couldn't figure out a concept in my head. And that cover and the covers to the first 2 books, they were actually designed by a Brazilian woman, and it was for a competition to design a cover for a Marjorie Allingham omnibus. Marjorie Allingham being one of the better golden age detective writers. So this Brazilian woman had done these covers. She hadn't won the competition, but I actually thought they were the best.
Right.
And I realised that we could just tweak them. There's little inlaid illustrations in them. Replace them with items from my books. Replace the blurb, replace the titles, and it just worked really well. And I have to say, everyone has really remarked on the cover, so I'm so pleased,
And you say that they're all out with Backpage. Now, they're kind of known as a sports related publisher. So what's your relationship with them? How did that come about?
Well, I know them quite well, actually, but they want to branch into fiction now. So they put my book out, and also a book, I don't know if you know a guy called David Simon. He's a really good writer. He's a really good novelist.
A few years ago.
Yeah. Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Right. Well, I've actually got, it's just sitting here. That's we plug for David.
Yep.
I haven't started reading it yet.
Responsibility of Love. It's my
Responsibility of Love.
I was going to say it's the next on my pile to read as well. So yeah.
Aye. So he did a novel a few years back set in Japan, which was really quite stunning novel.
I agree.
So anyway, this is Backpage's first forays into fiction, and they're just really good. They're a really good publisher. They cover every base, and they're just full of new ideas, and they're totally down with the whole online thing as well, which has been a huge help to me.
So this is interesting that they're deciding to go into fiction at a time when a lot of people think, well, fiction, maybe literary fiction or whatever, doesn't sell as much. So do you know why that was just something that they really thought they could do well?
Yeah, I think they're really connected to the world of Scottish publishing, and I think it's also a different experience for them trying to push fiction rather than sports books. Because, I mean, Martin Gregg, for example, who's one of the partners, he's a big fan of fiction, and especially Scottish literature. He studied that at university. In fact, he co-wrote a novel with me once, a football novel, but it's still a fictional novel. Yeah. So, yeah, I think it's something new for them, a new string to the bow. And it's not a huge company, but perhaps if they, cast different nets, then there's a chance that one day one of them they'll catch a big fish,
Yeah, it's exciting news to hear that, because I think it's an exciting time for Scottish literature at the moment, Scottish writing. There's quite a lot of new voices coming in, but there's also some people who are getting well established who are releasing some amazing new work. Well, going back to Leo, the character, what drew me in to begin with was there was a level of detail in the book which I really enjoyed. When he would, particularly, I think it struck me first meeting him in Helen Addison, is that when he would eat, there would be this fantastic detail of the food that he would eat. When he would dress, there was some beautiful detail. It really appealed to me that here was a character. It's interesting you were saying about reading crime fiction from earlier last century. He feels like a man out of time often.
Yes, and some readers have told me that sometimes they forget they're reading a book set in the current era, and then suddenly a mobile phone will ring or something, and they remember. Yeah, I wanted to create that. I wanted to create a world that was ornate and richly drawn, and that just, I wanted to stimulate the reader's senses, every one of our senses, the way things look and smell and taste, and I wanted to kind of dwell in Leo's love for the beautiful, be it antiques or art or furnishings or clothes or fine wine or good dining, and it's very much a homage to a bygone era. I myself am not much of a foodie, so a lot of that stuff was just based purely on research, and rather than going for kind of more modern menus, I was looking at the kind of things you would maybe get in the Dorchester in the 1920s or something. And I even at one point remember looking at a menu from the Titanic. So I think there's a couple of dishes from there involved. But yeah, it was just to create an atmosphere, really, Ali. And Leo's a very old-fashioned guy in his outlooks, and he's something of an anachronism. And the world he inhabits, I somewhat date it. So I guess I play around with reality a little bit, and some of the terms that he uses, and people wouldn't really use them anymore. People don't really refer to the radio as a wireless anymore or whatever else, and they don't really say "Great Scott" whenever they're surprised by something. But I really enjoyed doing that.
Yeah, because there's this sense that he is his own creation as well, because it's not he hasn't got the background you'd expect. He's deliberately kind of changed who he is as a kind of almost like an armor, it's a protection because of something.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I described in the second book that it's as though he lives inside his own movie. He almost lives his life as though he's a character in a film. We find out in the third book that the reason that he underwent this transformation, he was actually brought up in a working class area. Like many working class kids, his parents educated him at home, in the sense of encouraging him to read and appreciate music or whatever else. But Leo kind of took that and ran with it.
Yeah.
And he, in some ways, he was rejecting the culture, the working class culture that spawned him. And the reason for that is it rejected him. The reasons for which are explained in detail, but he was falsely kind of suspected of being involved in a very serious crime.
So there's a bit, what you were saying there about kind of man out of time and who he is. There's a bit in the book, if you don't mind, I'll read your own book to you.
Go for it.
Which kind of struck me, and it's a conversation between him and his friend Triton. It's maybe not the right word, but certainly someone who he knew at that period you're talking about when he was at university, and kind of, they do have similar outlooks. And Triton at one point says, "Yes, this is not the age of beauty, Moran. This is the age of vulgarity. The lower appetites now unashamedly take precedence, and meanwhile ugliness abounds." And then Moran says, "There's always been ugliness, boorishness, banality. Yes, but previously there was something to compare it with, an ideal that was widely exalted." And they go on to discuss, the nature of truth and how things are. And that kind of gets to the heart of what you're saying, isn't it, from his world outlook?
Yes. It's easy to eulogize the past, but there was a lot of things wrong in the past, and maybe in the kind of era that Leo would have wanted to have lived in, and that's undoubtedly true. There's a lot of things living in today that are far better, not least in terms of things like equal rights, for example.
His point of view, and the one he's discussing with Troughton there, it is in a kind of aesthetic point of view, isn't it? It's about, I mean, what you're talking about might have hid some terrible things in the past, but there was this front.
You know, one thing that characterized the past was there was a lot of hypocrisy. You know, a lot of people, you know, we presented a certain kind of moral order, but people didn't really live up to it. And you are better off just being more honest with things. But I think that the beauty and the aesthetic aspects. There's a museum in Bilbao which I went to a few years ago. I'm not talking about the Guggenheim,
Right.
But I think it's a Museum of Fine Arts, and it's not the biggest museum. There's maybe 3 floors. I started at the top, worked my way down, and it was like working your way down in time.
Yeah.
And it eventually ended up in the present day in terms of the genius of the artworks, and it was like a descent into hell. I mean, it was going from truly beautiful artwork from religious art through to impressionists, and then through into modern art, and it just got uglier and uglier. And I think a lot of that's to do with what happened in the 20th century and how certainly the European consciousness changed because the storm had happened and Auschwitz had happened, and you know, the dalliance with nuclear Armageddon had happened. And I think that maybe our brains were a bit better furnished before all that stuff went down. Maybe there was, maybe there were aspects to our own wickedness that we hadn't contemplated or been aware of. But also maybe there were things restraining us somewhat. Maybe there was certain ideas about civilization that more or less there was a broad agreement on. And I don't really think that is the case anymore. I mean, I should say, right, that Leo he's a devout Catholic, and you know, he that informs his worldview. What I kind of try to do in the books is, rather than just give him free rein, is that I try and create an opposing arguments with an opposing voice. Most notably his friend Stephanie, who's, I guess you'd call her kind of woman of the world. And they're great friends, even though there's this kind of contrast between them. And she offers an alternative view to what Leo says. But Leo sees the world in terms of good and evil. He thinks that you know, well, there is a God, there is another side to existence. And that his visions is somehow tuning into that other side.
But yeah, because at the end of that bit that I read, Moran says, but there's always grace. You know, that's there is always grace. And I think it's interesting if we talk about what appears to be kind of supernatural aspects of the books, but actually he wouldn't see it as supernatural, would he? He would see it as more something that's more religious than you know,
I mean,
horror or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, someone once said that there is no supernatural, there's just natural. You know, the supernatural, what we would deem the supernatural, is just the normal order of things. I suppose what I wanted to create in these books was a meaningful universe, a universe with a meaning at the heart of it. And I think a lot of crime fiction, I like a lot of this type of fiction, but it can wear you down a bit when it can be very bleak. And I wanted to have, even though terrible things happen, that there's a definitive kind of moral aspect to it. The use of the supernatural in the books, it's a kind of Gothic device that I use. It's what I tried to do, Ali, I think in the first book, when I wrote the first draft, it was pretty much a straight, yes, this has got a supernatural side to it, and you can take that as read. And then when one of my rewrites, I tried to kind of blunt that a little bit or fudge that a little bit, and therefore Leo would become the character who believed that some of the things that had unfolded were to do with the supernatural. And then the policeman, who's a guy called D.I. Lang, who's a good man, but he's just he's a materialist man. He's a quintessentially pragmatic man. He disagrees with Leo about that, and he actually expounds his own credible theory of events. The same dichotomy exists in the other two books 2 and 3 as well, in that there's events that happen that could be a trick of the light, or there could be something else. And Leo tends to take the something else view. So I don't want to I don't want to preach to the readers. I want to leave some ambiguity so that they can transpose their own interpretation on it as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons I love them, is because it's not heavy-handed. It's not, a bloodbaths or that kind of thing, or someone. It is. You have got that sense of doubt, and in the new book, you've got this mystery of the strange piper, but it could be explained, psychologically or just logically, rather than the supernatural thing. And I do really like that about them. Going back to Stephanie, I think she's a great character, and when she appears, you remember that it's in the kind of present day. She almost drags the story.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And he often catches up with her in Glasgow as well, of course. So you've made a series of podcasts, which I wasn't aware of, called Debut, which details your journey to being a crime writer. Can you tell us a little bit about that story and the podcasts?
Well, they were commissioned by Backpage Press back when I was published by Berlin Polygon. Because I know Backpage Press, they just proposed this idea. Neil White of Backpage Press, it was kind of his baby, and he drove it. And they wanted to do a podcast. Debut, and this catchline was a writer's journey from bedroom to bookshelf. And it was I think it was maybe 6 episodes, and it was about that. It was about conceiving of the idea, just the things we've discussed. It was about the getting published, getting an agent, losing an agent, getting a publisher, the process of writing the book, and then finally. And then I also spoke to a couple of people in it, such as Val McDermott and Christopher Brookmeyer. So I've recently started doing a season 2, which I've been doing myself. And as much as I interview writers, so far I've done Alan Parks and Denzel Myrick. I'm going to try and get a few more over the next few months.
So where would people find the podcast? Because it sounds like a really interesting listen.
Yeah, well, I think, what's the website? Let me just have a quick look. Yes, Ali, the website is called debutpodcast.com. Debutpodcast.com.
Fantastic. And you mentioned there you had your launch. How did that go? Was it a in real life launch, or was it still done remotely?
It was remote. I was going to do an actual launch, and I booked a hall and various other things, and there was a surge in COVID infection rate, and just by coincidence, over a 2-day period, several people I knew came down with it, and I just thought, I can't go ahead with this. Yeah. I won't forgive myself if people catch it. So cancelled everything, and we came up with the idea of doing a virtual launch, which we did from my flat actually. And Martin Gregg of Backpage, it was just us sitting down chatting, and then a few people asked questions in the comments section, and I did a couple of readings, and it was actually fine. It was okay, and I quite enjoyed it actually. It was something a bit bizarre about not having any response from an audience, and is this thing working? Is it actually going out?
Exactly.
Not someone a thumbs up if it was working, So, but it was fine.
And so what's next for Leo Moran and for yourself? Is there going to be another? Can you give that away, or is that trade secret?
Well, I haven't started working on anything else. I've got, earlier we were talking about whether, when I'd written the first one, whether I was worried about whether I could conceive of another one. But I've now got several embryonic ideas, but you become confident enough in the trade that you think, well, I could probably turn that into something. I could put flesh on its bones. So, for example, I've got one that's, I think, will be kind of set in the borders, but a much more, not a fictionalized version of somewhere. It'd just be a kind of different fragmented places in Scotland that I would haul together in this little borders location. I think I might call it The Lady of the Lake. That's its working title, because there's a little loch with a little island on it with this lady. Leo keeps meeting this woman. And then I've got an idea for a couple of prequels, Ali, both of which are referenced in the first book.
Right.
One is just referenced because it's called The Monday Murders, and Detective Lang is heard that Leo helped Detective Carolan with the Monday Murders, and that's all we hear about it.
Yeah.
So I thought to myself, that could be a story. It could be set in the mid-1990s, in a winter. There was a really cold winter then that no one seems to remember, but the Clyde actually froze. I think it might be 94, 95 or the following winter.
Okay.
And it would be a serial killer, and it would be, instead of Leo going to the countryside, this time it would all be in Glasgow. Another thing that you hear about throughout the novels is that Leo was mentally ill when he was a younger man, that he was actually in a mental hospital at one point. And so this book, if I wrote it, would be in the immediate aftermath of that, or such that he's really not in a good place. So that would be challenging, but I'd like to try it. And there's another prequel idea which is also referenced in the first book, and that's about how Leo became wealthy, because he lives in this beautiful apartment. It's good. Money's not a problem for him, doesn't have to work. And basically what he did was he, using his visions, not as a mercenary, he would have done it anyway, but he helped a family locate their daughter who had been kidnapped. And it involved Leo traveling around Europe, on her tail and on the tail of the kidnappers, and the family were very grateful, and with the signing of a check, made him a wealthy man, and enabled me to write about all the opulent things in Leo's apartment. So those are some other ideas that are floating around. A couple of other non-Leo ideas that I might turn to first. Don't know. Okay.
I love the idea of the young Leo, like the young Sherlock or something like that. That's like a great idea.
Yeah, well, I don't know if you're a fan of Inspector Morse. I always liked it, and I came up with this idea: a young Inspector Morse. They need to make one of it. It could be set in the 60s, and then next minute Endeavour popped up on the telly. You know, that was my idea. Probably 100,000 other people had it. You know.
But you've got your character, it's all set there, and I certainly, for one, would love to hear more about the younger version and why he becomes the man that he does.
Yes. Well, as I say, one of the narratives that I had to cut out of the second book because it was too long, it charted I think he was 14 in the summer of 76, the hot summer of 76, and that was when his world kind of fell apart. So I don't know. I'd like to. I mean, that's all written. You know. I mean, I don't know. It might be something like 10,000 words. I'd like to release that someday, either as a standalone thing or as part of a novel, as a kind of flashback sequence. But I think he's got a lot of mileage, and he's developed a little bit over the 3 books as well. I mean, not massively, because to some extent your detective has to be an anchor to a series, but he's evolved a bit, and it'd be interesting to see what he does in the future and how he became the man he is.
Yeah, I agree that he does evolve. I think when you first meet him, there is a kind of sense of, oh, am I going to like this character? I'm not entirely sure, you know, but maybe it's the reader getting used to him, and also, as you say, this development over a period of time, because I grew to absolutely love him, even in the first book.
Well, I think he's that's the worry when you're writing a character like Leo, is he too sour, you know, does he go too far sometimes? And it's that fine line between maintaining sympathy for a character and losing it. But I think if you build it around someone whose motivations are noble, then the reader will pick up on that. And he is, deep down a very good person. He's got his faults, and the readers seem to warm to him. Whereas someone like Ignatius J. Reilly he's a grotesque character. I'm talking about a Confederacy of Dunces again. And it's comedy, and that's fine, but you don't really. It's not a question of caring about what happens to Ignatius. It's. And then in the book, in the Mystery of the Strange Piper, there's a character called Marcus Triton, who's as you mentioned, is Leo's university friend, who's invited him down after all these years. And with Marcus, I had such great fun writing him, Ali, because that's probably the most fun I've had as a writer, because he really is a comic character. He's an absolute rascal, and I guess he would be the kind of archetypal trickster. He's there to persecute Leo. And I guess maybe he goes over the line for some readers. Maybe they'll just find him just too obnoxious or too cruel. But that's kind of okay. He is what he is. He's in the series for this one novel, and he fulfills a certain role in it. But you don't necessarily have to love him, But you could. I don't think you could have him as your main man,
I was thinking that in an Ealing comedy, he would have been played by Terry Thomas. He's got that about him, especially when Stephanie suddenly turns up. Oh, I don't want to give things away. I won't give anything away. Charlie,
sorry, I was just going to say lastly is when I think of Triton, I think of a young Peter Davison, who played Doctor Who. I don't know why. He was kind of my Doctor Who when I was a kid. And I've always liked him as an actor, so I kind of had Trouton's face in my Davison's face in my mind when I was writing Trouton.
Well, I mean, that's an interesting thing. Have you thought about that? Has there ever been a sniff that these might be made into TV?
There was a sniff a few years back. I don't know what happened to it. Someone asked me to write a former publisher asked me to write a little synopsis for the screen. Never heard anything else. I think they would lend themselves well,
Yeah, I think they definitely would. Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, Charlie, thanks so much for taking the time to have a chat with me. I really appreciate it. It's
been a pleasure seeing you, Ali, and all the very best to you. Thanks for having me on.
No bother at all. And we'll be back soon with someone completely different.